Hey, good evening, everyone. I know some folks are thinking still be a couple of people still connecting. I know we're gonna have a number more folks coming, but welcome. Thank you. All right, we're getting there. Um, Hope you guys been enjoying the weather. It's an excellent day in the last couple of days. So then we got about 5 minutes. Got a little time and here in the beginning and once class starts for questions, if anything has anything on their mind. We got Pam. Pam's here, of course. I'm looking for our main speaker. She's going to show up in a few more minutes.
Hey, Steve, I have a question, which you may have answered last week, but
Okay.
we talked about the test that you can't sign in and then sign out, but you were going to give us all the time we need, right?
Yeah, I don't
that
think
correct?
I don't think that is correct. From my understanding, you can't like log out and then log back in.
Okay, where I live in Hagerstown and our internet is sometimes pretty spotty, so I'm concerned if I lose internet that it will sign me out. Is there a way that someone can override that?
Yes, probably me. So what I'll do, Carol, I think probably the simplest thing is I'll just give everybody my cell number, and if things
Okay,
come up, or just text me, and I'll see what I can do. That'll
okay,
probably
great.
be the easiest thing to do. And
All
so
right.
I think that's how it works. That's how I remember it. I will see if there's any way I can get around that, other than, just call me, and if we need to reset the exam, I'll reset it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure, sure. All right, let's see. Looking for Nicole. Not yet, but we've got Pam here. So we got a few more minutes. 6 o'clock, and Pam, I just got a couple announcements, and I'll probably hand it over to you. But we're just waiting for folks joining us.
Hi, Steve. This is Stacy Fleischman. I don't know if you can. I'm on my phone for a few minutes
I
before I
say,
get to my computer. I don't know if you can see my name from my phone as well.
I still sure can. Sure can.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
All right. Mm. Oh, what's it? Something chat? Check that out here. Oh, okay. All right. Hillary, you're listening. You're trying to listen and walking. Okay. Thought you'd probably do something, which I got to do later after class is over. Yeah, I got to walk the dog again. So that's my thing. So, um,
If it gets distracting, I can turn off my video.
okay. All right, Hillary. And let's see, Mary's still trying to join us. It's funny how some people jump in right away and other people it takes a lot longer.
So speaking of dogs, our dog was lost last Wednesday and I completely
Oh, no.
missed we got her back. It's fine. But I missed the session. I understand it was recorded.
Uh-huh.
And I guess maybe you all talked about how to access those recorded sessions.
I know mine's posted. I forgot that was the other thing. I gotta check, see if I posted Amanda's up there, but I did post Amanda's notes and my notes or PowerPoint notes this afternoon on
So that would be on
a shared
so
Google
what
Drive.
do I need to,
You would get an invite. You would have got an invite this afternoon asking to join a Google Drive.
yeah,
And that's where you get the notes.
okay.
The PowerPoint. I gotta remember that. Let me think about that. Where that is. I'll get that for you.
Yeah, so I think last week it was talking about like accessing the website and getting the information, and that's what I missed. So,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's correct. That's correct. And talking about ecology, yes.
You said an invite was sent out for the Google Drive? I didn't get it.
Yeah, I didn't get one either.
I didn't get one.
Oh, no, I will check again.
Okay.
Did anybody get one?
No.
So glad I'm not the only
All
one.
right,
Like,
okay.
I didn't see that.
All right, I'll look. I'll pop, once Pam, no, once Pam, once Nicole gets started, I'll pull up the other computer and take a look. So I don't want to touch this thing once it gets going. I don't like messing with it because sometimes I accidentally hit a key and then knock everybody off and that kind of thing. So I'll pull up another computer, take a look while you guys are doing that.
So-
We're gonna,
So if it's recorded, there generally will be a Google invite to be able to see it.
no, that's not what I said. I said the PowerPoints will be on a Google Drive.
Okay. But
And
not
I
the
think-
whole session.
That's right. That's something Willie's doing. He's editing that. And he's gonna post that. So I'll check on where that is for you.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
But I gave him mine a while back. I thought you guys had gotten that. Right, so we're up to about 40, Pam. Maybe 42, something close. Like Mary's still trying to join us.
I know I'm letting people in, Steve.
Oh, you are? Oh, good for you.
Mhm.
So, hey, all right, at this point, there's I've got a couple announcements. I'm going to hand it over to Pam Hosmer. So, Pam is going to talk to you a little bit about one of our programs that we collaborate with. But first, I'm going to mention that I was talking with our president, Renew, and we're going to try to bring back our mentoring program. So we'll have an advanced master gardener will be assigned to a group of folks in the class, and they'll try to, if you have any questions and things like that, they'll check in on you, see your progress, and try to see, hopefully, get you onboarded here within the program with any issues, things like that. We've had it in the past, and it's, over the years, we've had it and then faded away, then it came back a couple of times. So we're bringing it back again. And the other thing is I'm going to check about the invite. Well, you didn't get to see that invite. So I'll do that during the break, but let me just go ahead and, oh, poor Mary, she still hasn't gotten in, man. So, hey, so Pam Hosmer is going to come and speak to you a little bit here this evening. She's with the SNAP Ed program, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Education. And Pam is going to talk to you about some volunteer opportunities in a program that she really runs and coordinates there at the Extension Office with collaboration with the Montgomery County Master Gardener Program. So Mary's on there twice. All right, I'm trying to. All right, so Pam, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Thanks so much, Steve.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I am going to share my screen. Let me see here. And hold on. Beginning. There it is.
There you go,
Okay.
Pam.
All right, we got it. All right.
Yep.
So, as Steve said, my name is Pam Hosmer. I have been a master gardener since 2008. Best years of my life, best decision of my life, I gotta say. I also work here at the Extension Office for the SNAP Ed program, and I'm a nutrition educator. Part of my job is to teach nutrition education at Montgomery County Public Schools, and I teach in 12 different elementary schools, and I support their school gardens. I am also the co-chair with Carol Kosery of the Master Gardener Garden Educators. This is what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. I started working with the Garden Educators 2 years ago. This is a fairly new program, and we now have about 25 or 30 garden educators. And this season, we added about 10 to 15 interns from last year's intern class who have come on board with us. At this point, the garden educators have been focusing on supporting two main programs. One is the demonstration garden field trip program, and the other is community outreach in the schools that I work with. The demonstration garden field trip program is a field trip. We've narrowed it down now to first graders because it's so popular. We kind of accommodate everyone who wants to come. It takes place at the Durwood Demonstration Garden, and we have approximately 45 students maximum per session. The sessions are from about 9:30 to about 12:30, and the students can stay a little bit later after the program if the teachers want them to stay and have a picnic lunch out in the field and on the picnic tables behind the demonstration garden. Most of them do that because kids love running around in the field. When we do the program, the way we do it is we have the 45 students and we divide them in half. And one half will go to the outdoor classroom and have a nutrition education lesson and tasting. Those are SNAP Ed curriculum that is used for that. And either the classroom teacher or myself teaches the lesson. Then the other half of the group will be going on tours of the demonstration garden with the master gardeners. We break that group down into usually about 2 or 3 students per master gardener. And it's a very nice, intimate tour with the kids. And we have the garden educators, we initially got together and came up with some activities to do in the garden, which are from the SNAP Ed curriculum. We have a soil lesson and activity and a couple other things that we use out there, as well as we loosely mapped kind of a guide for around the garden topics that you can talk about, because mainly it's really led by the students and what they're asking about and interested in. Also what's growing at the time, because every day is different in the garden and every season is different. And then we do the lesson and the tour for about 45 minutes, and then we switch. And at the beginning of the session, when the students get off the bus, we have a special activity that we do when they get off the bus, which talks about pollinators. So we have a kind of a game that we play to get them off the bus and moving around and get their wiggles out so that they're not too crazy. But that has all worked out extremely well. We have the program. We initially started the program in the month of May and have between 9 and 10 days that we do the program in May. And then we just finished that program and we had 325 students come through the program this year. That doesn't include all the teachers and all the parents that came with them. So it was really a big crowd that we had through in May. And I added more. So we've also included, started offering the program in September for the schools that cannot fit into the May schedule. With the demonstration garden field trip program being an outdoor only program, obviously weather is a factor, and if it rains, we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave out a group that was coming on a day when it was pouring rain, because some of the grades have 7 or 8 classes in them, and they have to come in 3 different sessions. So if one of them got rained out, then you could theoretically have 2 or 3 classes of students from that school who didn't get to go to the program, and we didn't want to leave them hanging with, hearing about how fabulous this was from the rest of their peers. So we came up with the rainy day option, and that is myself and the master gardeners go to the school if it rains, And we provide the same kind, a similar program. We divide the group into two, and we have one classroom running the lesson and the tasting with me or the teacher. And then the other classroom, the Master Gardeners, do a gardening activity. They make seed baby necklaces with the kids, and they do a game about My Plate and talk about the 5 food groups and eating healthy and, you know, from food in the garden and that type of thing. It's been extremely popular. In fact, this year we had one school, they ran out of money for field trips, so they didn't have money to take the bus over to the garden. And their lead teacher called me and said, could we possibly just ask you to bring the rainy day program to our school? Because the kids love that too. So we did the rainy day program for them this year because they ran out of money for the bus. I also provide training at the end of April and then in August for the May and September sessions for any of the Master Gardeners who would like to have some additional training, or if you're new. We also have, if you are working with our program, we have the Master Gardeners who have been doing the tours and working at the school for the rainy day program. They're happy to mentor you and to, you know, give you a tour of the garden, show you exactly what we're doing. That has been very successful. And the Master Gardeners give the tours to the 2 or 3 students. But if it's your first time coming to the garden or you're an intern, I always ask, are you comfortable taking the students on a tour by yourself? Or would you rather have me buddy you up with a Master Gardener who has done this before so you can shadow them until you're comfortable? So we're very accommodating and supportive of all Master Gardeners who come to help us, and we have been building the program that way. We also take in a lot of feedback and ideas from everyone, all the Master Gardeners who work with the program. And we have informal meetings after every one of our sessions to see what was, you know, any problems, any comments, any great ideas. And we've also built the program up that way with a lot of great ideas that we've all come up with as we're going through. The other thing is the garden educators also attend community events and family nights at the elementary schools that I work with. These events can be small with 50 people, or they can be as large as 350 people in like a parking lot outdoors, music, vendors, food trucks. It's really fun. And SnapEd, I will provide all of the materials that you need. All you need to do is come on over, and you will have everything there for you to help with the activity. Also, it's unusual for a new Master Gardener who has never helped with the program before, or an intern, to do the program by themselves, because the existing garden educators are usually coming also, and they'll show you the ropes and help you get acclimated. But we have lots of information about what the activities are. It's the seed baby necklace, lettuce cup terrarium. For those of you who have never heard of either one of those, seed baby necklace is tiny little plastic bag, like zip top bag for like jewelry. And we put a moist cotton ball in it and put a couple mustard seeds, and then you close it up. It has a hole. You put a cord around the person's neck, and you wear it around your neck for a couple days, and the seeds sprout. And the kids love that. We also have the lettuce cup terrarium. I don't know, oh, there you go. You can see this is what we use for that. We fill it with soil, put the lid on, sprinkle some seeds. I usually use radish seeds. They're called sprouting radish seeds that pop right up within a day or two. And those are great. We make those also at our events. So we have a wonderful team of Master Gardeners in the Garden Educator program, and we'd love you to join us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And my contact information is on the screen. If anybody has a question now, you know, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Pam?
I just had a quick
Is
question. You
this-
said that- Oh, sorry. Somebody else go first?
No, go ahead, go ahead.
You said that it was for first graders because just of the amount of like participation that is like happening. When you go into the schools for other kinds of events, is it more like mixed ages or is it always just for like this first grade kind of early elementary age?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking that. The events are the community events or family nights, and that would be pre-K through 5th grade at the elementary school. So it's all the grades across the spectrum. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Is this one of the volunteer opportunities? Is part of it?
Absolutely. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Pam, I have two questions. One is, if someone is interested in doing the demo garden field trip, education with the students, are you signing up then? Do you sign up for all of them? Like you said, there's 9 in May, and then there will be some quantity, some number in September. So it's an all or nothing type?
No. It's Carol Kosary is my co-chair with this program, and we send out, she's the computer guru. She sends out a sign up email, and you with all the dates that we offer the program, what the schools have signed up. And then each Master Gardener will sign up for whatever dates. They can sign up for 1, they can sign up for 4, whatever you're available and interested in helping with, we're happy to have you help. But you can do as many or as few as you want.
Okay, well, that took care of my second question too, which was how far in advance are the trips scheduled, or are the dates scheduled?
We scheduled in May. I put it out at the beginning of April this year, and I think it was at the end of March, and within 48 hours, it was filled because the schools immediately jump on it because they don't want to miss it. And so we're anticipating the same will be in September. We'll put that out a little bit later because we have to wait for the teachers to get back, but they're expecting to come in September.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You might have mentioned, but maybe I missed a bit. What percentage of the schools are able to participate in the
In this program?
Yeah.
We right now, I work with 12 schools, and some of them, as I mentioned, have between up to 8 or more classes per grade. And that's like that one school, it's 165 students in 1st grade. So the capacity, we've only had, we can't have all my schools come because there isn't even the capacity, because May, we're cut off we're in between the growing season starting and the school year ending and the buses being blacked out for field trips.
So I have a question. Is there anything that you all do like at the schools to grow plants for them to see,
Yes, that is a good question. We are growing the garden educator program, and that's one thing that we're talking about right now is how else can we have the garden educators come into the school and help with teachers who are
having a little
interested.
garden, and they could, it could be there with them, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's the direction we're going in. We're starting with baby steps and building it up. But yes, that we do, several of these schools do have gardens and really would appreciate Master Gardeners coming in helping. But one step at a time, because they have to make sure when we build that up and have Master Gardeners go in, we have to make sure it's sustainable at the school and, with us to be able to keep coming. So that's why we're just going one step at a time, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that, because if you're interested, please let me know, because we have lots of schools that have gardens and they totally need help.
Okay, thanks.
I have one more question for you, Pam. Are these identified schools that you're working with, are they Title I schools?
No, not all of them. SNAP
Okay.
Ed works with schools. Our requirement is they need to be at least 50% free and reduced meals at the school, not Title I. We don't go by Title I, we go by free and reduced meal rates.
Okay.
And they have to be more than 50%. And some of these, one of the schools that comes to the program is the highest in the county. I think they're like 94% free and reduced meal rate.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm happy to help. And we're really excited for the interns this year to come and join them at Garden Educators, because we've gotten some fabulous interns this year who have joined us.
Oh, that's great, Pam. Thanks very much. Thanks for sharing this with us, with the class tonight. And I know Pam's probably gonna jump off here, but grab her contact information. It'll be up there for a next minute or so as we transition to our next presenter, Nicole.
Bye, everybody.
Well, bye, Pam. So I know Nicole is here. I gotta make Nicole a co-host. I gotta do that right now. So this is my first chance meeting Nicole. So welcome aboard, Nicole.
Thanks, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great.
So I'm going to, there you go, make you a co-host. All right. So I heard, or I got the impression that Andrew kind of persuaded you to come speak with us. I appreciate that. Nicole, you know, since I meeting you here, right here on the spot, you might have to tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're an assistant professor.
Yeah.
At AGNR Plant Science and Landscape Architecture at the University of Maryland. I guess it's down at College Park.
Yep.
Awesome. So,
yeah.
All right. So, I think I got you squared away. I see your screen.
Perfect.
Yeah, you want to give us a little background, Nicole, what you're
Yeah,
doing?
absolutely.
Sure,
Thanks so
sure.
much, Steve, for inviting me and for having me. As Steve said, I'm Nicole Fiorellino. I'm an assistant professor and I am the state extension agronomist for University of Maryland. So I do research and extension covering basically our major agronomic crops in the state. So corn, soybean, wheat, a little bit of barley, and my connection with Andrew Risby, who you guys will hear from eventually in this series as we work together on our industrial hemp research program. So, I am a longtime terp. I got both my PhD and my master's degrees from University of Maryland. I originally had an animal science background, and for my PhD degree, I was in the environmental science and technology department. So soils is my background. Soils is my jam. And I have been lucky enough to give a version of this talk to a number of different county master gardeners groups. So I am not shy and I am not new to this audience. I will say one of my favorite things about presenting and speaking with the master gardeners audience versus my kind of traditional farmers audience is you guys have the best questions and you guys like keep me on my toes with different questions. I usually put together my slides for my farmers and I know exactly which questions they're going to ask me because I just know them. They're like the same faces over and over again. But it's really interesting and exciting to me to present to a different group and a different audience who has like totally different perspective and totally different questions. So really excited to present to you guys today. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to monitor the chat, so we might just, I might just take a pause and try to check the chat occasionally. I have a natural kind of break in my slides about halfway through, so if that's okay with everyone, maybe we'll take a short break kind of when we get there. I might need a bio break at some point myself, so we'll try to do that. I will provide a copy of my slides to Steve. I logged in and heard him talking about the Google Drive. He can absolutely share my slides with you guys. I'll make sure he has a copy tonight before I leave. And so I might go a little fast, but don't panic because you will get a copy of my slides. So I'm going to try to kind of go maybe past some of the things that I don't want to talk about as much and focus on the things that I find exciting, that I find interesting, but do know that you will get a copy of the slides. So don't panic. Don't try to write down everything. I feel like I'm talking to students when I teach. Don't try to write down everything I say. And I do appreciate giving the opportunity to present via Zoom. I live over on the Eastern Shore, so technically I'm based in College Park, but I have an office over at our Research and Education Center that's on or just across the bridge in Queen Anne's County. So saved me a trip, but it's very hard giving presentations via Zoom because I can't see anybody's face. So I'm gonna crack my usual jokes and hopefully you all are laughing. I just can't see you all laughing. All right, so let's jump into it. So I also have a clock in front of me, so I will be conscious of the time. Like I said, there's things that I'm gonna kind of move a little quickly past. We're gonna talk a lot about soil science tonight. I'm gonna go back real fast. Just know that I did a full PhD degree in soils and I took like 30 credits in soils, and I'm really trying hard to like boil it down to what's the most important thing for you guys moving forward as, master gardeners. This is not a complete end all be all of the basics of soil science. And, hopefully you've got some additional resources as part of your training materials. My email is at the end if you've got questions, but, just know that this is very difficult to try to fit like a full degree into a 2-hour course. So trying my best, but we're going to go kind of fast. All right. So first, let's talk about what are the components of soil. When we're talking about soil, like what is soil? So number one, the word dirt is a dirty word. I have all of my friends and colleagues trained that you never say the word dirt. It's soil. If anyone says dirt around me, I go, it's soil. And I say it and everyone goes, oh, sorry, Nicole, soil. So when we're talking about soil, you may think, well, it's just dirt. It's just a static component, but it's actually an ecosystem. And we're going to get into that. But just the physical components, what are soil? Generally, an ideal soil is 50%. I like to say 50%. Let me see if I can get my laser pointer. 50% stuff and 50% not stuff. All right. So our stuff is generally, most of it is mineral matter. It's, rock that is weathering into soil. And then typically we'll have 2 to maybe 5% organic matter. We're going to be talking a lot about organic matter, so I'm not going to jump into it right now at this moment. All right. So the 50% stuff is material, rock that's in different conditions, different weathering stages. And then generally in ideal soil, the not stuff is about 50% air and 50% water. All right. And think to yourself about soil that you've seen, maybe recently, maybe not recently. I'm sure you can envision a soil where it's 50% stuff and 50% water, right? A waterlogged soil, a soil where after like a big heavy rain, maybe a long rain or maybe a quick flashy rain where, we get 2 inches of rain in a half hour and that soil just cannot infiltrate into that soil, and you see ponding, you see water on the surface. That's 50% stuff, 50% water. All right. And maybe you can think of a situation where there's almost no water and it's basically just stuff, right? Beach sand is a perfect example of a soil where there's very little water. It's basically soil and air. There's not a lot of water holding capacity when we're talking about like straight beach sand. All right, so I'm going to try to give you some visuals, some analogies to think through kind of as we're going through. So that's our ideal component of soil. What is the purpose? Why do we care? Why do we learn about soils, right? As a soils person, now turned an agronomist, you'd think, oh, she loves plants. And I like plants. Plants are cool. But soils is really where it's happening, right? We feed our soils, we take care of our soils, we manage our soils because that is the home, that is the medium for our plants to grow, all right? And our soils provide to our plant roots, water, obviously, and oxygen, and nutrients. When we think about like feeding our crops, feeding our plants, feeding our garden plants, right? it's really, we are feeding our soils. We're putting those nutrients into our soils. We're making our soils the most hospitable, perfect living condition for our plants to live and thrive. And so it is extremely important to be studying our soils and thinking about and understanding our soils as it relates to and how we can maximize our plant growth. And I'm going to sort of apologize, but not apologize in advance. I obviously have a lot of crop examples, and I do my best to scrounge my memory and make sure I'm not only talking about crops, but really the principles of soils kind of really don't matter what plant you're growing, right? You're generally trying to feed a plant a crop, whether that's corn, whether that's, a tomato plant in your garden, right? We're still managing our soils to try to feed and provide a hospitable home for our crop, our plant. So let's talk a little bit about a soil profile. So I bet you didn't really know that there was so much happening kind of below your soil. When we talk about a profile, we're talking about, the top of the screen here representing the surface where we're walking. And as we're looking down vertically on this screen, this is basically if you were drilling a hole down towards the center of the Earth's core. And so we are looking at the different layers here that make up a soil profile. Again, soil is just rock that is in different phases of weathering, okay? And so we're obviously going to see much more weathering at the surface and less weathering as we drill down deep, get closer to the center of the earth, if you will. And so we do a lot of work thinking about, these upper horizons, these A horizons, because that's the horizon, that's the soil that's interacting with our plants. But it's also important to understand, what's happening a little bit down deeper too, and what are kind of the natural parent material, if you will, that our soil comes from. All right, so we're going to start digging into some of these layers. All right, so and I will say these are such beautiful images of soils. I've cited a lot of places where I got these images from. When we get to the end talking about these profiles, I'll tell you a little bit about our soils program and what's going on at Maryland as well. But let's jump in and let's talk about these horizons. So generally we have someone who labeled these, started logically. Closest to the surface is A, and as we get down deeper in the profile, it goes further into the alphabet, so A, B, C, all right? The A horizon, generally, again, what is interacting with our plants. Our B is considered our subsoil, depending on how deep your A horizon is. Roots may be penetrating down into your B horizon, especially if you're doing something like forestry. Yeah, definitely your plant roots are going down that deep. In our agricultural crops, general garden crops, we're not really going too far past that B horizon. Our C is kind of like that intermediary, like partially parent material, partially subsoil, and then down below that, you're in the rock. All right, and this is fantastic, a soil profile. I will say that University of Maryland has what's called a soil judging team, things you didn't know you needed to know. There are students that travel around the country. There's national and international soil judging competitions. And I will say, basketball teams or it's football teams, but we are world-renowned soil judgers. So we are good for something, and that is judging soils. So generally we see A, B, C horizons in our managed soils. But as you see here, the notes on the surface, we can also have O horizons, which are organic horizons. Those honestly are not very developed in our managed soils, but we can see them in forests. And what I like to call the elusive alluviated E horizon. Again, we don't typically see these in our managed soils. You've got to really find the right place geographically in the country where there is even an E horizon, and it's got to be like in a forest where it's really unmanaged. This is a beautiful image. Most people don't ever get to see an E horizon in person. All right, so let's look at what an A horizon. So A is kind of the general name, and then we'll have sub lowercase letters that kind of, for a soil judger or a soils person, kind of further describe, through time. So we A or an AP, P which stands for plowed. All right. Generally, you're going to have a darker color in an A horizon, signifying that organic material that's in there. This is, you know, your home for your plant roots. And so when we're doing different kinds of management, like adding fertility, maybe liming, this is where we're focusing our energy in that AP horizon, where whatever kind of management we are doing is going to directly impact our plant roots. Oh, I actually can see the chat here. Okay, I saw a quick question. What is the depth of the soil levels and depth to bedrock in general? Great question, Mary. And I'm going to give you the traditional extension scientist answer. It depends. It depends where you're located. So in the Midwest, when we talk about like those really thick organic layers of soil where they grow like the best corn, their A horizons are okay. Image, like we're lucky if we've got 6, 8, 10 inches deep of a topsoil of an A horizon. So it actually really does, I hate to be the one to say it depends, but it really does depend where you're located and what the depths are in those different layers. What exactly does parent material mean? Great question. So parent material is just basically the nutrients, the elements that make up the rock that our soil weathered from. And again, what your parent material is really depends geographically where you're located. And I've got a really cool slide coming up when I get through the horizons that shows Maryland and what we see kind of differently in Maryland. So I will get to that. Is it possible to increase the depth of the A horizon if you're regularly adding compost, mulch, and other organic matter to the soil? Sort of, but not really. You're not necessarily going to be increasing that depth. Really, honestly, the way to increase that depth is through potentially a lot of tillage. You could kind of start tilling into that B horizon. Here, I'll move into the next B horizon and start maybe churning up a little bit of that B horizon. Tillage is really the only way you're kind of intermixing or changing the depths of those horizons, if you will. So really, we're never doing much to actually manage we're not really doing much to like change the depths. We're really just managing that A horizon. So this image here is a great image as we're moving into those subsoils, those subsurface soil horizons. This is a B horizon. This is really not a very hospitable place for our roots. It's going to be very dense. It's going to be, there's not going to be necessarily a lot of nutrients here. There could be a lot of iron. We really don't necessarily want our roots going into this layer, and they're usually not. So we want to try to preserve our topsoil, and we really don't want our plants to be growing. The B horizon is not the place for our plant roots. And then as we get down deeper into this C horizon, this is a really great image. You're basically in rock at that point. There's a little bit of weathering, but there's not going to be much. Again, the major driving force that is weathering our rock and turning it into soil is water. Water and a lot of time, like eons of time, right? So we obviously are going to be the most weathering, the most development of soil up in those surface layers where there is that interaction with water, right? If you figure you're trying to go 24 inches, 2 feet down into the soil, water is never permeating there, especially not through this super clay, super dense kind of B horizon. So that's why when we get further down into that C horizon, we're still basically looking at rock, because water, our main factor of weathering, just has not made it down there yet. So your C horizon is going to look much more like your parent material. I can't even venture to guess how deep this is. They didn't put a tape measure there, but digging a profile, something that looks like this, takes like a backhoe. Oh, it's a lot. It's really intense. Those soil judgers, man, they are really into it. They go out there and they find these different soils using web soil survey, which we're going to talk about. and you've got to excavate it and you've got to clean the face off. It's a very intensive process, but yeah, it's more than just basically digging a hole out in the ground. All right, so that's really quickly the horizons. Not necessarily something you need to know about, but what you guys might find interesting, I find this interesting, is looking at Maryland, the state as a whole. So Maryland is often referred to as America in miniature, because in terms of, geographic diversity, we go all the way from, literally the beach over here on, in Worcester County, all the way up into the Appalachian Mountains, all right? And what I find interesting as a researcher is I have the ability to, do research across all of these kind of major geographic regions. And you betcha that I see differences when I'm doing research over here down in Salisbury versus, out here at our Keedysville Research and Education Center. And so it's very exciting for me that I get the opportunity to perform research across, all these different geographies, but really not in a very large state, right? I can pretty much make it to all of my research sites in a day's drive and back, which I cannot say for a lot of my colleagues in the Midwest states, where it takes them a very long time to get through all of their research studies that are located across their state. So generally, we call the Eastern Shore kind of the coastal plains. And a point I want to bring up is that we're talking about Maryland, but zoom out and think about in your head, these regions flow downwards south through Virginia and even North Carolina. I have, colleagues in North Carolina. They've got the same geographical regions there. They've got their coastal plains. We sometimes split it up here in Maryland to the Eastern Shore coastal plains, the Western Shore coastal plains. But generally, these soils are actually material from the top of the Appalachian Mountains that weathered and was deposited down on the Eastern Shore. So we actually have a lot of that originated up on top of the Appalachian Mountains that make up where I am today on the Eastern Shore. And then we move up into the Piedmont. You'll notice that this red line kind of broadly follows I-95. So we typically use I-95 as about our fall line. That's really where we kind of transition from what we consider coastal plains up into that Piedmont region. And then we kind of generally move up into like Ridge and Valley, the Appalachian Valley. And then, as we get out into far western Garrett County, we're more into our mountainous region out there. So America in miniature, very exciting that we have all these different regions so close by in our state. Really important point that I want to hammer home, and you're going to see this slide again and again, is texture. So if you take anything away from the beginning part of this presentation, it's an understanding of soil texture, okay? This is what is one of the most fundamental, most important properties of our soils. I don't really care how deep your A horizon is. That really does not matter to me. My questions, or if you flip it around, if someone comes to me with a question trying to maybe diagnose a problem, my first question is going to be, what's your soil type? What's your texture? What's your sand, what's your clay percentage, right? I'm going to ask the same question in multiple different ways so that I can try to get to what is your soil texture. It's like going to the doctor and the first thing the doctor asks you is, how old are you? And, like, what's your gender, right? Like trying to get a baseline. Okay, what are we talking about here when you're asking me a question, right? So first thing I'm trying to get at is your texture. And this is what we call the textural triangle. I'm going to go through here in a minute what sand, silt, and clay are, but know right now that sand, silt, and clay, they are a percentage. The three of them add up to 100. And then based on what percentage your three particle sizes are, you get kind of a general name category of your soil, all right? Something that I want you to notice right now, we're going to come back to this, I promise you're going to see this triangle again, is if you just take a second and you look at the different names that are on this triangle, something that you may notice is that just looking at the names, how little of a percent of clay actually has to be in the soil for the name clay to appear, right? So you really only need 20 to 30% clay for the word clay to appear in that title, all right? Opposed to something like sand, where you need like 50% sand before you start seeing the actual word sand appear in that name, okay? And that's not an accident. And you'll probably, what stood out to you right away is this giant orange, like, you know, 1/3 of this whole triangle that's basically just considered clay, all right? You have over 60% clay in your soil, it doesn't matter. Is where the magic happens. When we start thinking about nutrients and nutrient holding, clay is where it's at. So that's why it's part of the reason why you see it, you know, the name clay is so important. What I'm getting at when I'm asking someone their texture or what their soil type is I'm trying to figure out how much clay is in their soil. All right, so I said sand, silt, and clay were the 3 particles that make up your texture. Anything that is bigger than 2 millimeters is a rock and it's not part of texture. So we're looking at anything that is 2 millimeters and below. You'll see 2 millimeters to 0.05 millimeters is what's considered sand. Hopefully you all have had the wonderful experience of being at a beach and you can think and you can like kind of feel in your hands what beach sand feels like. That's sand. With your naked eye, you can visibly see the particles, right? You can visibly see the individual sand particles, all right? Sand is pretty self-explanatory. Silt is the next smallest size particle that makes up your soil textures. You typically cannot see silt. The particles are too small for the naked eye to be able to see. Silt is a very weird, it's very hard to describe it. It's smooth when it's wet, but it's not sticky like clay. Like people who have done, you know, pottery or pottery works before, like, you know how that feeling of clay feels, like it feels sticky. And silt, it's hard to describe other than what it says here. It's smooth, but it's not slick or sticky. And you cannot see those particles with the naked eye. Clay is obviously the smallest particle. I have a image a little bit later on in the presentation of an electron microscope image of clay, which is one of the most strongest magnifying microscopes that you can see. Generally, everybody kind of knows what clay is. It's definitely sticky when it's wet. And these images, you know, to touch back on the soil judging, this is what you learn how to do when you're a soil judger, is to do what we call texture by feel. There's a whole flow chart of how to figure out where your soil falls on the triangle simply by feeling it in your hands. So we're kind of building up here. So we've started at the individual particles and now we're kind of building up to our entire soils here. So we have these individual particles and they're basically glued together in some kind of, you know, combination with one another. And the soil particles being held together is what we call soil structure. All right. And it's almost like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's kind of like Legos. Like you have your individual Lego pieces and then you can put different pieces together. Maybe you're trying to build a house out of Legos and maybe you build a couple walls with your Legos and then you stick them all together. So as we're kind of building up, we have our individual particles. When we start sticking them together, they're called kind of PEDs. And these soils, because of the sizes of these particles, will naturally only form certain shapes and certain kind of arrangements. This is going a little deeper than you all would probably know, but what's important to understand is we want to glue that soil together. And if we go back to that original pie chart of 50% stuff, 50% not stuff, we need to be able to glue those particles together so there's physically space between those PEDs or between those structures, because we want to be able to hold water and we want to be able to hold her. So as we put kind of these PEDs together, if you envision these kind of very small pixels here, if you will, those are the individual particles and they're being held together in these PEDs, and we have tiny pores in between those individual particles being held together in those PEDs. Then we also have larger pores, macropores, which are the space between those PEDs. And again, if we think about surface tension of water, I know I'm trying not to go too like science deep because it's late, but the spaces that we create, those micropores and macropores, are where we hold air and where we hold water. So think back again to a very saturated soil. You know, maybe a soil, maybe your yard where you got 2 inches of rain in 30 minutes and there's just water ponding on the top, right? All of these macropores are filled with water. All of the air has been pushed out. That's where that water holding capacity comes from, is the space between these PEDs kind of being filled up, and we want there to be a little bit of air and a little bit of water. All right. I'm going to go to the next slide and then I will consult the questions. All right. So, this is perfect. This is what I just said. I'm not even looking ahead at my slides. I'm just talking here. All right. Perfect picture. If you hadn't been able to envision yet in your head, this is what I'm talking about. A very saturated soil, right? And so macropores and micropores are important for holding air and water. Macropores are the air and water that our plant roots can actually access. There's always going to be a little bit of water left in those micropores, but our plants are never going to be able to access that, all right? We're going to talk a little bit about that moving forward as I finish some of these definitions, all right? All right, let me see if I can go back to some of these questions that are pertinent. If tilling helps increase the depth of the A horizon, integrating it with the B horizon, do digging species have a similar effect? So good question about the cicadas. So I don't know specifically about cicadas, but we do talk a lot about what's called preferential flow pathways. So if you've got maybe a long-term no-till, again, I'm talking agricultural field, we'll often have, wormholes, we call them, for lack of a better term. Any really small animal that will burrow from the surface down, somewhere in that horizon. And this becomes like a shuttle, or almost like a pipeline, if you will, for water to kind of infiltrate, from the surface down into the profile there. So yes, we do see the impact of not only just like, tillage from implements, and also those burrowing animals can also act like tillage too, right? They can bring some of that surface soil down into the profile as well. So we do see that as well. In some of our colder places, not in Maryland, I'm talking like, much northern regions from here, we see thaw and freeze tillage. So, soils will freeze and expand, the water in the soils will expand, and then it will thaw again, and we see like a churning effect from that, thaw, freeze, thaw, freeze. We don't see much of that here. Alina, I read in our book you can't change soil texture through soil management. Why not? Oh, I'm going to come right back to that. Like you knew what my next slide was going to be. All right. If I need to know what kind of soil I'm working with, why doesn't soil testing tell you that? Oh, we're going to get there too. So I'm going to table your question, Allison, because I promise we're going to get to that later. All right. I'm going to go back to Alina's question about you can't change soil texture. All right. I have a funny joke here that a friend of mine told me. The sad truth about soil texture is you get what you get. All right. You can't change the percentage of sand, silt, and clay that is in your soil. I've had master gardeners in the past ask me, can I just go to Home Depot and tell me how many bags of sand I need to buy and I can mix into my garden to change my soil texture? And I literally had to do a double take because I couldn't believe someone was actually asking me that question. So I had to, it wasn't a stupid question, it was just different because I never thought about it, like actually trying to change your texture. So I'm here to tell you that you can't, all right? It's the hand you're dealt. You were given, that rock that's underneath, and that is what it weathered into, that percentage of sand, silt, and clay. Had someone say, this is an old farmer, someone told me this, don't marry for love or beauty or money, marry for good soil, especially if you want to farm, because that lasts forever. Good, I heard one person laugh, thank you. All right, so you cannot change your texture, but you can improve the conditions that you were basically stuck with through other soil management. But organic matter, I think, is one of the easiest, like, first steps for dealing with, you know, the hand that you were given in your soil texture. I will say, before I get too much further on this, that I've gotten some crazy questions from master gardeners about, you know, like, this part of my yard is this soil type and it's not very good. What should I do about my garden? And I'm like, move your garden to a different spot in your yard that has better conditions. Some people, maybe you may be looked in, maybe you've already like gone all in, you know, and you're like really invested in that spot in your garden or that spot in your yard. But, you know, if you're talking to someone who maybe is just beginning, just starting out, and they're even in the planning stages where they're like, where should I put my garden? You know, going through, when we get through this talk, I'm going to show you some tools that folks can use, like start in a good spot, and then you can do things to improve it from there. But, you know, maybe don't pick the wettest, lowest spot in your yard for your garden. I'm just saying. All right. So let's talk a little bit about organic matter. Okay. What is organic matter? Basically, it's dying plant and animal residue, dying or dead, different levels of dead and dying. Okay. But it's basically any type of material that was once alive, was once a living thing or a part of a living thing, like leaf litter, but is not alive anymore. And the reason that organic matter is so important is this is the home, this is the food, this is the fodder for what makes soil soil versus dirt. Okay. You want organic matter because this is where you're going to get your insects, your bacteria, your fungi, your soil organisms. Like, this is where you get the life into your soil. All right. And so the organic matter is just decaying living things. So maybe it was leaves, maybe it was dying earthworms, maybe it was something bigger than that, you know, some type of dying animal that is now decomposing, but it is nutrients that are tied up in a living, in an organic source. Okay. And this is in contrast to inorganic. So inorganic nutrients like commercial fertilizers. Okay. I know we use the word organic to mean a lot of different things. So for the purposes of what, you know, I'm talking about here, organic is in contrast to something inorganic, like a fertilizer that you would apply. All right. Just wanted to kind of operationally define that for what we're talking about here. Okay. And there's like different forms of, if you will, deadness, right? So humus, not to be confused with hummus, which is like my daughter's favorite snack, hummus and peppers, right? Humus is really when we've gotten to that most stable form, you know, that the organic material is really fully decomposed. And this is where you have, this is the organic matter that's going to show up on organic matter when you do a soil test that Allison so foreshadowed we are going to be talking about at some point here. All right. So I'm going to run through this next section pretty fast because it really all boils down to one thing. Okay. Factors affecting your organic matter content in your soil. It's all related to air. Okay. Air and, you know, ventilation is the opposite of what we want for organic matter. Organic matter likes cool, moist, you know, conditions, right? Organic matter that you put on top of the soil is not going to last very long, right? But organic matter that's maybe buried down below, where it's cooler, where it's not in the direct sunlight, where it's not directly having air movement, is where it's going to remain, okay? So as we increase air, we're going to decrease organic matter. So I'm going to kind of fly through these, you know, really fast, all right? This is kind of more on like an agricultural large scale field, but where we have pasture and hay, crops that don't get run over or tilled or managed as much, okay? Crops that generally are covering the soil surface and kind of left be, That's where we're going to have more organic matter versus things like our crops where maybe we're cultivating the field, we're running over the field a lot, we're really disturbing that soil surface. That's going to decrease our organic matter. All right. Drainage, where we have water, where there is water kind of in that soil profile, that's where we're going to have organic matter. As soon as our soils start drying out, as soon as we start bringing that water content down, we're going to be breaking down our organic matter. Tillage, as I just mentioned, so the more you are tilling and mixing up your soil and introducing air into that soil, you're going to be decreasing your organic matter. Your texture, again, not much you can do about this, but what's important is to understand that in your more coarse textured or more sandy soils, where there are larger particles, larger micropores that may not be holding as much water, you're not going to have as high of an organic matter. You can try, but farmers who have very sandy soils over here on the Eastern Shore, Caroline County, if any of you guys are familiar with where that is, they can add as much manures and organic material as they want, and there is just a limit. Their soils are just never going to get above like 1% organic matter. It's just not possible. There's just too much air because of their texture. They can try and they're going to keep adding it, but they're just not going to be able to build that organic matter like, you guys in Montgomery County, where you just generally have heavier, more silts, more clay soils to hold that water and really maintain and build up that organic matter, okay? All right, so we're generally talking about soil conditions. So we're looking for that structure. We want to see that soil kind of being glued together. That organic matter acts as a glue to be able to hold that air, hold that water in the profile. That is really important. That's where we see our microorganisms, we see our worms, we see our bacteria, our fungi, our good bacteria and fungi living. That's really what we want. And we can get all of this through our organic matter. All right. I said some of this. There's a couple things that I want to talk about. Okay, compost, composted manures. Composted manures are like the best form of fertilizer. I like to think of this as slow release fertilizer. So is it going to be super available to your plant in that first year? No, but it's going to act like a sponge that's kind of slowly seeping out nutrients and water. So compost is really good. I will say this especially for you guys in Montgomery County. I say this in a lot of my more horsey counties. Make sure you are using composted manures. Composting is an active verb. It's an active process. It's different from stockpiling. So piling your manure in a pile and leaving it there for 2 years is not composting. Composting is an active verb. If you can remember that from this presentation, that composting is an active verb. All right. You can buy organic fertilizers. Dominique in the comments mentioned about leaf grow. You can purchase organic amendments. They're commercially sold. Fantastic. Cover crops. I'm going to mention cover crops in a minute. This is definitely used on agricultural fields, but there is nothing stopping, gardeners from using cover crops in their garden. I'm pretty sure we're going to have some type of cover crops in my garden this year at my house, just because why not? Vetch, clover, legumes are the best. So legumes are naturally fixing nitrogen. We're going to talk about this in a minute when we get to the nitrogen cycle. And generally any type of plant that's going to stay in the soil and kind of decompose will provide organic matter. I talked about all of these benefits. I did want to mention, I think we're all generally aware of maybe hopefully farmers are faced with, nutrient management regulations. While we love manures, animal manures as a fertilizer source, we do have to use them judiciously and make sure that we are paying attention to not over applying nutrients beyond what our soils and what our fields can really hold, because we really do want to be minimizing our nutrient losses kind of off-site, to water bodies that eventually drain into the Chesapeake Bay. Nancy, why only use composted manure, if I may ask? Great question. It needs to be composted to kill any weed seeds or disease-causing organisms. Yes, that is great too. I would say I really like composting because you have started the breakdown process of making those nutrients more available to your plant. So number one, more consistent, right? Instead of just having a pile of manure that's in different kind of stages of decomposition, the compost process actually evens out, gives you a much better, like more even product at the end. So you're avoiding like putting really good compost on one area of your garden, your field, whatever scale you're using it at, and then a less decomposed, a less quality material in a different part of your area that you're trying to fertilize. Killing weed seeds, killing disease-causing organisms, absolutely, especially if you are using compost in an area where you're growing food, like something that a human would consume. Making sure that your manure has been composted is going to ensure that you're not, it has gotten to the high enough temperature that it's killing all those disease-causing bacteria. There are some bad bacteria out there. They're not necessarily bad in the soil, but they can be bad if you ingest them, as a human. And I just think, consistency of the product to work on. I would not want just like horse manure, especially horse manure, that's just been like sitting around in a pile. It's just kind of useless other than maybe as a mulch, like covering that surface, but you're not going to get those nutrients. They're not going to be readily available to your plant. You're just basically like putting turds on your garden. I don't know. It's just not very desirable for me. I really want that. Your compost is ready when you can't actually tell what the original material was that you were composting. Like it shouldn't look like manure. It shouldn't look like poop. It shouldn't smell like poop. It should just be a very consistent, like almost clean looking material. It shouldn't have a smell. And it goes through multiple like heat and cooling and wetness cycles. So I took all those slides out. I didn't realize there were going to be questions about it, but I could do a whole hour on just composting itself. Best practices for incorporating organic matter into existing soils and beds, incorporating cover crops so it releases over time, deeper is better. I think it depends. I think, so if I had my druthers, farmers won't do this because it would take a lot to really, build your organic matter from deep kind of up. But I think generally you want to be keeping in mind that horizon. So if you're just putting, manures on the surface, fertilizers even on your surface, that's not where your plant roots are getting to, right? So I know everyone is all about no-till, and believe me, I'm all about no-till too. But, at some point, you got to think about where you're putting those amendments and where your plant roots are actually living. And so if you just are continually, piling on the surface, you're not necessarily getting that benefit down deep where your plant roots are. So some tillage, some incorporation is good. I think it kind of depends on your quantity, like how much of your source and how much space you have to cover. So I think it just depends. I would focus on that kind of 4 to 6 to 8 inches where your plant roots are going to live. I would want to make that the most hospitable place for your plant roots. I know that was a very broad, not a great answer to your question, but it was a start. Here's an example of some kind of purchased or organic material that you can buy. Leaf grow, somebody mentioned in the comments. You used to be able to buy dried and pelletized chicken litter. It kind of came like this. They looked like pellets. They didn't smell. They were like super hydrophilic. So as soon as they touched water, they like puffed up. They like dried them out. Purdue's no longer pelletizing their manure, but it was a thing you could purchase in a while and purchase at one point. And then Milorganite, I never knew that Milorganite was actually like treated human waste, sewer sludge. So interesting. Again, it's safe if it's on the market at that point. It's dried, it's been sterilized, there's no harmful bacteria in it, but it's definitely organic matter that is going to feed your microorganisms in your soil. As promised, I had a picture here of cover crops. This is how farmers use them, but there's nothing stopping anyone else from using them too. It would basically be, you know, some type of crop that you would plant in the fall and let it grow all winter. Generally, our farmers use small grains, hairy vetch, clovers. Those are really good because they're legumes, so they fix nitrogen, they add nitrogen to the soil. It keeps your soil covered over the winter time, kind of generally keeps it protected. And if you kind of mix it in, oh gosh, you're adding such good, you know, organic material really intensively to your soil. All right, soil water holding. I think once I get through this, I'm almost approaching my break. Hallelujah. I might need a bio break. All right, so I want to talk about soil water holding capacity. And the best analogy I have for these terms is a kitchen sponge. Okay, so think about a kitchen sponge and you are washing your dishes, you finished washing your dishes, you've totally soaked that sponge, and maybe you're just holding it in your hand or it's just sitting maybe in your sink. You know how you have a soaked sponge and it will drip, it will kind of drip to a certain point, and eventually the dripping water will kind of stop. And you know there's water. You haven't squeezed out the sponge yet. You're just naturally kind of letting gravity pull that water out of that sponge. That is what we would call in a soil field capacity. All right. After gravity has taken all the water that it can, that soil is at field capacity. So there is some percentage of air and some percentage of water, maybe about 50-50, in that not stuff space of our pie chart, right? And that is water that is still accessible to our plants, but gravity has taken what it can, all right? Now say you've got your kitchen sponge and you wring that sponge out as hard as you can. You are trying to get every drop of water out of that sponge. All right. That is our plant roots sucking every little bit of water out of the soil. But you know how you can never squeeze all of that water out of that sponge, right? Like you can squeeze as hard as you can and you know there is still a little bit of water left in there. The analogy to our soil is that is the water that is trapped in those tiny little micropores. That space between that sand and silt and clay molecule that is being held together by organic matter. All right. There's always going to be a little bit of water left in our soil that our plant roots will never be able to get to. Our plants will wilt and die, and they just are not able to fight against the surface tension that's holding that water in those tiny little micropores. So the difference between your sponge drip drying and what you've squeezed out of it, that's called plant available water. Okay, there is some water that's going to run through your profile, like from a rainstorm, that your plant's never going to be able to get. Gravity is going to take it and it's just going to drain right through, and your plants are never going to be able to access it. So there is some quantity of water that is plant available. All right, it's my favorite analogy. Everyone knows how to use a sponge. All right, soil drainage. This is really important. And this is also, you know, if I'm getting a question from a farmer, they're asking me about maybe an issue they saw in their field, I'm either going to directly ask them about their soil drainage, or I'm going to be able to infer it generally from the soil type that they're telling me they have, and maybe generally the county that they're located in. That's also going to be my first question is, where are you located? Generally, give me a county, right? So drainage is really important. That gives us an idea of kind of the speed with which the water will move through that soil profile, and maybe generally how much of that profile is underwater. So for you guys in Montgomery County, you know, upper kind of in the Piedmont Western Shore, you're going to have generally good drainage, all right? And good drainage is usually indicated by these bright soils in your subsoil, right? Your A horizon, your surface soil is going to be nice, deep black, and your subsoil is going to be, in our case, usually red, something like this. We have a lot of iron, or, you know, we've got this beautiful yellow. We don't see as much of this here because it's not in our soils. This indicates that there is water in the profile, but not so much water. There's air, there's aeration. All right. We're seeing 50% stuff, 50% not stuff. And half of that 50% not stuff, maybe more, is going to be air. Okay. Versus soils that are less well drained are going to have what we call mottling. Not modeling like, oh, Vogue, strike a pose, but mottling, Mottling, all right? And that's this kind of gray, drabby looking color. And when we see this in a soil, this is an indication right away that this soil spent some time submerged underwater, okay? The act of being underwater, basically pushing out all of that air from those macropore space, turns our soils this mottled gray drab color. All right. We see this quite frequently in not very deep soils, maybe over here on the eastern shore, lower eastern shore, where we've got a lot of drainage. The water table is very close to the soil surface. So just digging a simple hole, you will A, see water, and B, taking a soil sample, not that deep, you will see these kind of gray conditions. So it's generally an indicator to us that soil, the water table came up above that point and kind of remained there for some part of the growing season. And, you know, when we're categorizing soil drainage class, you know, when we're talking about well, moderately well, somewhat poorly, poorly drained, that's basically how deep we have to go in that profile before we start seeing those gray colors. And, you know, this is not an exaggeration. In some areas of the Eastern Shore, like I said, you dig a simple hole and you see a pup, you hit water. So the water table is very close to the surface there. So I've been talking about different soil characteristics, and this was actually one of the questions, like, how do you know kind of what your texture is? How do you learn more about your soils? And you can look up soil survey reports. So this gal here, I'd love to meet her. I've been giving this presentation for a while now, and I'd love to know who this soils model is. I'm sure she's out there somewhere posing in that field with her maps and her soil, you know, texture and color book, Munsell color book there. So you can go as old school or new school as you want. There are physical paper, you know, books by county that are soil survey reports. When I was a graduate student, they were getting ready to renovate one of the rooms in our building on campus. And I panicked and I tried to grab a copy of the paper soil surveys from every county in the state. I was like, oh my God, we need these, can't throw them away. And I like panicked and I was like, we're missing, you know, whatever, Carroll County. And it didn't matter because they're all online at Web Soil Survey. That is the link. If you literally just Google Web Soil Survey, you can get to it. It is like any government website. It's clunky. There's a little bit of a learning curve. I forget how to use it if I haven't used it in like a year or two. But it's there. You can type in your address and you can kind of draw a little circle around where you are and you can learn all about your soils there. I don't have a slide on it, but you can also, if you're into Google Earth, not Google Maps, but the actual download Google Earth, you can download the Web Soil Survey layer, basically, and you just turn it on and zoom into where you're at, and you basically can get all the same information from Web Soil Survey. It's really just more what you're most comfortable with. You know, soil surveys, you know, this is some reasons why you would use soil survey. I'm not gonna lie, like my husband and I, we moved 2 years ago, and I looked up the soils where we moved to, and then I realized it was constructed anyway, so it really didn't matter what Web Soil Survey said because it was all just topsoil from them building the house anyway. But you know, it's definitely a good place for some information. We find it more useful kind of in agronomic settings where we're looking at a whole field. It's definitely better on a larger scale. Gives us a lot of information. Again, if somebody's calling me with a problem, I can kind of look them up on Web Soil Survey or Google Earth and, you know, get some information there about their characteristics. All right. I'm going to try to answer a couple questions. This was my natural break. So, Steve, I'm not sure how long of a break you usually take. I'd love about 5 minutes, but if that's not enough, we can go longer. It's up to you guys.
So we usually do about 10 goal.
Okay, that's fine. I'm going to try to, let me see if I can get through some of these questions. Okay. Composting slides. Yeah, sure. I'll throw some of my composting slides at the end of this presentation before I send it to Steve. And so I'll just kind of tack it on to the end so you guys have them there too. What do you think of kitchen counter electronic compost machines? I don't know much about that. I've never done it personally. I've seen the old school like barrels that you kind of turn. I don't really know how the countertop ones work, but the general premise of it, like mixing and turning around, is really what's most important. People that large scale compost, it's also about you have to get your compost up to a certain temperature. So it's water and temperature, and then it's maintaining that temperature for a certain amount of time as well. So it's like getting it hot and then maintaining it. And there's also water mixing into it too. So I'm assuming those countertop ones like do the same thing, have some on a smaller scale, but have the same kind of premise. So yeah, that's awesome. As long as you are like taking the steps to like just compost and not just like throwing your food scraps out there. Next question, Mary. Does Maryland have any issues with PFAS contamination in sludge used as fertilizer on farmland? Are the commercially available sludge you mentioned free from PFAS contamination? All right, I'm not going to get too deep into PFAS, partially because I'm not as well versed on it. Apparently what I'm learning is there's PFAS in everything. So I don't feel fully like comfortable. I'm not evading the question. I just don't have enough information to like fully answer your question at this point. I know that we're kind of struggling to figure out how we are measuring, not just we farmers, agriculture, kind of everyone, how we're measuring PFAS in general in materials. So I'm thinking once they have a better idea of how we're testing for PFAS, we'll have a better understanding of, kind of where to go from there. So I'm not saying I don't know. I'm not really sure, and I'm not well versed on the topic right now. How does groundwater impact soil profiles? Great question. That was kind of related to that that drainage, the drainage class. So having that groundwater coming up close, especially close to your surface layers, your A layers, it is really going to impact what you're seeing, especially what nutrients, not only what nutrients are there, but what nutrients are available. So we're going to dig a little into chemistry. So get your chemistry hats on during your break, because we're going to get a little into chemistry. But when you start changing the forms of the nutrients, they're not available for the plant to take up. And so when we have that groundwater, coming real close up to the surface there, not only could it be leaching out our nutrients and anything else in our soils for that matter, but it's also just changing the form of those nutrients so they're not plant available. Do vegans normally compost without using manure? I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe someone who is a vegan could answer that question, but I don't know anything about that actually. So sorry. All right, that was all I saw of the questions. Did you say you wanted to do 10 minutes, Dave, for a break?
Yep. 10
Okay,
minutes.
awesome. I'm going to take a bio break as well, and I will see you all back, and we will jump into soil fertility. Steve, I realized I didn't notice what time it was that we took the break, so let me know when we're ready to start again.
Oh goodness, I can't probably help you too much, but I think you got a couple more minutes.
Okay.
It was 7:23.
Oh, thanks. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to be prompt, but I didn't want to cut us too short. And is it okay if I send you a PDF of the slides, Steve?
Sure. Oh, that'd be fine. That'd be great.
And I'll add in those composting slides too, since somebody asked about it, if that's okay.
It's great.
Okay. I still haven't mastered the like Zoom. It's so hard not seeing people in front of me giving a
Oh, yes,
presentation. Tough.
absolutely. It is. So Nicole, your main office is over there in Green Anne's? Or-
Yeah, I'm at the Y Research and
Y.
Education
Okay.
Center with Andrew. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
where Andrew is.
Okay.
Yeah, I go to campus when I have to, but the traffic and the parking.
Oh, yeah. Parking, yeah.
Nicole, are you over there by Friel's corn plant?
Yeah, we're not that far. We're kind of right up the road from that. Yeah.
Upwind or downwind?
Oh, yeah, it depends on the day. Sometimes in the summer you do get a whiff of it. And I'll admit, it was a little while before I knew what that smell actually was. And then I did a tour and I'm like, "Oh, now I know what the smell is."
Yeah, the silage pit that's there.
Yes. I'm not originally from Maryland. I'm actually not even originally from an agricultural background. I'm from New Jersey, from the suburbs. So I had to learn all of this stuff kind of brand new at some point. So I think that gives me a perspective of helping people learn because I remember what it's like to learn a lot of this material, not that long ago in my life.
Yeah.
What attracted you to this? What attracted you to this subject?
Yeah, so I went to college. I went to Rutgers. That was our land grant in New Jersey, and I was like gung ho. I want to go in animal science. I want to be a veterinarian, like every girl who's interested in animal science. And I found veterinary medicine really boring when I got into it. It was very routine, and it was like the same. Like working in an animal hospital was very routine and boring to me, and I didn't realize that I didn't like it until I started doing it when I was a student. And I really fell in love with research. I'm very like ADD, and I like the fact that I can, work on a research project for a year, 2 years, and then I get bored of it and I can kind of move on to the next thing. And like every day is kind of different for me. Some days I'm in the field, some days I'm in the office. And so I really was attracted to the variety of kind of what I do. And I love trainings like this. Like I love teaching in this informal setting. I classroom taught for a little while. I taught at our local community college here. And I found even that was like too routine and too structured for me. It just didn't, I don't know, it just didn't keep me engaged the same way as, this kind of teaching and the extension work that I do. I like farmers
Thank
too.
you.
They're my audience. I know how to talk to like old men, I guess. I don't I did a classroom demo like in a elementary school up in my county in Kent County, and I haven't been nervous like that in a really long time. Children are not my target audience, like adults generally are my target audience, and I was like I haven't been nervous like that in a very long time. So, yeah.
You said something about your how you got interested in this field.
Mhm.
What is your current research focus?
So, in addition to soils, nutrient management was really my background. So, and I think that sets me up well for our, generally agronomists, my peers across the country, they focus a lot on, maximizing corn yield, soybean yield. And I'm very concerned with that. We want our farmers to be profitable, but we live in such a sensitive environmental area here, being, around the Chesapeake Bay, that really the focus of my research is how can we be profitable? How can our farmers be successful? But balancing that with our environmental challenges. And so, my goal is how can we continue farming? How can we continue doing what we're doing, but in a safe manner, taking into account our Chesapeake Bay issues. We have to. We have no choice. We're not going to be the Midwest where we're pushing high yield crops. That's not what we're doing. We are being profitable and we are being as efficient as we can, you know, with how we utilize our nutrients, how we manage our soils. And so I could rattle off my different studies, but generally that's like the focus of my overall research, you know, really supporting our farmers with, you know, the understanding of nutrient management is at heart of everything we do. So
Thanks.
I see that come through on a lot of the research proposals I'm usually having to read over. I work at the USDA with the marketing service, and one of the big things that they're always trying to push for when people are doing the research grants is like, how can you guys do this better with less chemicals, less environmental impact, but still be able to get the results that will keep you in business?
And I think it just comes kind of naturally to us here in this region. And I one last comment, then we can jump back in. I find it interesting as I'm going across the country and giving presentations, you know, in different areas of the country, like just operationally seeing what farmers elsewhere are doing is like, to me, it's eye-opening. I'm so Maryland, East Coast, Mid-Atlantic centric, and then you go to the Midwest, and I'm like, you do what now? You know, like that's just, to me, it's so foreign. And then I'm so foreign to them coming in and sharing what I'm doing, you know, we're doing here. So it's a really exciting sharing of knowledge and, you know, sharing of ideas. And it really just, I don't know, puts it all into perspective, going to different parts of the country and seeing what they do and feeling like we are really the forerunners and, you know, kind of up in front here in Maryland. We have really some of the most progressive farmers who are willing to try all of the crazy different things that we ask them to do. So that's great, Sarah. Great perspective. Thank you.
I also suspect it's because we've got Beltsville right in the backyard and everything, that there's several thousand acres that they're testing all this stuff on.
Yeah, it definitely helps.
It has been nice to see like Kansas and even the Pacific Northwest like starting to get on board with contributing stuff from their areas too.
Yeah, it's slowly getting there. I always say if I had to go back and do my studies again, I think I would go into farmer psychology because I am like really interested in understanding how farmers make decisions. And full disclosure, I'm married to a recovering dairy farmer, and I don't even understand how he makes decisions sometimes. So it's a very fascinating area of study.
Some of the board meetings I sit in with all that are made up of all the farmers and everything. It is interesting to see across the country the different different thoughts.
Fascinating. All right. Well, if we're okay, I will hop back in and we'll kind of get rolling forward. Soil fertility, we're going to kind of jump into soil fertility and talk about nutrients. And I do want to spend some time talking about soil testing and soil test results. I think that's something very pertinent to you guys moving forward as master gardeners. And so I want to spend some time on that. I kind of just have the general, you know, Wikipedia definition of soil fertility, and it's basically what I've been talking about, right? Having good soil condition, and you want to be able to support life, support plant life, you know, in that soil. When we think about a fertile soil, we're thinking about, you know, kind of these general 5 areas, and we've touched on some. We're getting into some of them here. You know, we've talked about organic matter, we've talked about structure, we talked about fauna, having those living things. Now we're going to jump in a little more on the chemistry side, talking about our soil nutrients and our soil pH. All right. And how we can, you know, increase the fertility or change the fertility. You know, these are kind of our general kind of management, soil management practices, if you will, you know, adding some type of amendment, be it fertilizer, commercial fertilizer, organic fertilizer, just straight organic matter, liming to change the pH. Thinking about our ground cover and choosing our crops, choosing our plants to really, you know, support that fertility in that soil, talking about a rotation, right? Farmers are looking at not just 1 year. We don't have corn farmers here and we don't have soybean farmers. Everyone in Maryland is growing a 3 to 5 year rotation, right? And so they're rotating through, they're changing up the crops on that soil to really try to increase the condition and the quality of that soil, and also doing that through managing things like tillage and their soil compaction. So we're going to talk a little bit about nutrients here. I just want to throw out a couple main definitions here. So when we're talking about our nutrients, remember nutrients that we are putting in the soil to feed to our plants, whether it's corn, whether it's tomatoes, we've got to put nutrients in the soil to feed to our plants. And we kind of broadly categorize them as macro and micronutrients. And that prefix, macro and micro, is referring to the quantity in which a plant needs it. So a macronutrient, the plant is going to need a lot more of that macronutrient than a micronutrient. All right. I'm not going to quiz you. You know, you don't really have to memorize these. Maybe you do, but you can study them. So generally when we're talking about our macronutrients, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The plants need these in the largest quantity. So generally, we as soil managers are worried about ensuring that we have ample phosphorus and potassium in our soil to be supplied to our crop, all right? Then kind of our secondary macronutrients, calcium, magnesium, sulfur. I would venture to put sulfur maybe in a different order there, but that's just semantics, all right? And then we've got our micronutrients. Again, not going to make you memorize them, but they are important because they do have an important physiological purpose within a plant, any plant, be it corn, be it tomatoes, doesn't matter. But generally our plants do not need as much of these as they do nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all right? When we are thinking about our mineral nutrients, when we're just generally thinking about our plant health, we use what is called Liebig's law of minimum, and the analogy is a barrel, all right? When I was classroom teaching, you would be shocked at how many people do not know what a barrel is anymore and how many people do not understand what a stave is. I'm going to go out on a limb that this group generally understands what a barrel is and that it is made up of staves. So if we think of the analogy of a barrel made of staves, all right, we can only hold as much liquid in a barrel as the shortest stave. Okay, so if we are trying to increase the liquid in a barrel, we have to figure out which is the short stave, and then we have to deal with that stave. Okay, and when we are dealing with problems, issues in our soil, when someone calls me and they have a question, hey, something's wrong with my corn or my soybeans, I'm asking them questions. I'm trying to diagnose. I'm trying to figure out what is the short stave. What is the problem that is limiting? Okay. And if we take our barrel analogy and we, translate that to our soils, to our field, right? Our plant growth is the liquid inside that barrel. And we can have a number of different measures, parameters that make up these staves, right? So one of the staves or a couple of the staves could be our nutrients, right? Could be nitrogen, could be potassium, all right? Believe it or not, water. Water could be our short stave. Water could be our problem that is impacting our plant growth at the moment. Insects, weeds, or pests, that could be our short stave too. It's not always necessarily, just a nutrient, all right? Or even something like the pH of our soil, which I promise we are getting into, could be our short stave, okay? And just remembering this analogy is really important, all right? So number one, you're trying to figure out what that short stave is. And then number two is you're trying to correct that short stave. So if in the example here, our pH is our short stave, just adding more nitrogen or potassium is not going to solve the problem, all right? The problem, the short stave, is not a lack of nitrogen and potassium. Our short stave is that our pH is not allowing our nutrients to be in the available form for our plants to take up, all right? So when you're going through these issues or when you're getting a little bit better about reading soil test results, figuring out what's that short stave and dealing with that problem is the only way to move forward. All right. I love this analogy. Love this analogy. All right. Deficiency versus toxicity. There is a very thin line. All right. This is most important with those micronutrients. I've had farmers call me and say, Nicole, I need to buy pure molybdenum because I have a molybdenum deficiency and this is my problem. And I am just like, sir, I do not think that molybdenum is your problem right now. Yes, you may be deficient in molybdenum, but I don't think that that is your main problem. Let's take a look at what else you have going on, all right? And this is an issue specifically with our micronutrients. Now, I know I'm going to say this and someone's going to be like, no, that's not true. You're probably never going to apply enough nitrogen that you're going to cause a toxicity to your plant. You're going to hurt the environment because you're going to lose that nitrogen before you poison your plant with nitrogen, okay? Because your plant needs that much. But if you apply pure molybdenum to your tomatoes, there is a very good chance that you are going to poison, it is going to be toxic. Okay, so generally we say if you are managing your organic matter and you are managing your soil pH, you're not going to necessarily have to add pure molybdenum. Okay, it's just making sure your pH is right. Generally, there will be enough in the soil that you don't have to worry about potentially over fertilizing toxicity in your plant. All right, because there's a very thin line between a deficiency and a toxicity when we're talking about those micronutrients. Okay. So I've kind of been going around and around here, and I alluded to the fact that we were going to come back and we were going to talk about clay because that's where all the magic happens. And I gave a real quick intro to these different nutrients, and I feel like we kind of have to put it together, right? So I started back off after the break and I said, you know, we are feeding nutrients to our soil so that we can get those nutrients into our plant because our plants are going to take up nutrients through their roots. Okay, so how do our soils hold on to these nutrients enough so that they're not lost, but not tight enough so that they never are able to release those nutrients to our crop? Okay, when we talk about our soils being able to hold our nutrients, we use a very specific word. It's called adsorb. That's AD. Adsorption, okay? Not the same thing as absorption, which is where you eat a meal and you absorb those nutrients into your belly, for example, into your stomach and into your body. Adsorption is basically similar to an atom, an element where you've got a nucleus and you've got all those electrons kind of swarming around, okay? That is generally what is happening in our soils. We have a solution, we've got water, and there are nutrients, and they're kind of swarming around our soil surfaces. They're being held enough by, you know, opposite charges, but they're not being held so tight that the plant roots can't suck them up when they suck up that water, okay? So we use the word adsorption, AD, like delta, okay? And I love this image. It's a really good image. So I talked about clays are where all the magic happens. These magnetic charges that hold these, that adsorb these nutrients to the soil are happening in our clays. So when we think about a beach sand type soil, all right, there's not a lot of nutrient absorption happening there. If you are familiar with, you know, kind of like a hydroponic greenhouse or like a soilless medium, right? That's kind of what almost sand is like, right? You're not necessarily expecting that medium to hold on to the nutrients. You're pumping it and you're providing it to the plant. That's the opposite of what we want in our soils. We want our soils to have some nutrient holding capacity. And in our clays, that's where that happens. So when folks are calling me and saying they have a deficiency, I'm asking them, where are you located so I can figure out how much sand, or conversely, how much clay they generally have in their soil type. That's going to start giving me clues as to the condition of what's going on there. All right, so in our clays, we have high surface area and we've got a lot of negative charges. I'm going to show you what that visually looks like in a minute. As promised, this is an electron microscope image of a clay particle. Okay, this is what a tiny little teeny tiny clay particle looks like. It looks like a stack of papers. All right, this is where we're talking about that high surface area. There is negative charges on each side, in and out of those little sheets, if you will, that make up the surface of a clay particle. That's where the magic happens. That is where all the nutrient holding capacity exists, is in that surface area. All right. So we call this cation exchange capacity. Your soil surface is made up of all of these negative charges, which is going to attract positively charged nutrients. All right. Like charges repel, opposite charges attract. All right. So when we look at the list of our nutrients here, we see a pretty long list of these positively charged cations, right? These are really important macros and micronutrients that are positively charged, meaning they're going to generally swarm and be held on that clay surface if you have enough clays in your soil. What I do want to point out is that there are some important nutrients here that generally exist in an anionic or negatively charged form. We're going to talk about these in a minute, all right? Another thing to notice, nitrogen exists in multiple forms here, in a positively charged form and in a negatively charged form. We're going to dig into that here. Again, no need to memorize this, no need to write it down. You're going to get a copy of this. Okay. All right. I want to zoom in and I want to talk a little bit about, the different nutrients. We're going to talk about the nitrogen and we're going to talk about the phosphorus cycle. All right. Nitrogen is arguably one of the most important nutrients for our crops, any crop, corn, tomatoes. All right. It's part of chlorophyll, nucleic acids, amino acids. It is extremely important in making up the plant and the health of the plant. It's very mobile in the plant and it's very mobile in the environment. I'm not going to go too much into plant nutrition. Andrew Rispy is going to talk to you guys about that in a later lecture. All right. Nitrogen cycle. This is a lot. There's a lot going on here. So I want to zoom in and I just want to kind of hit the highlights here. Okay. The green circles are showing the different forms of nitrogen that exist. Okay. The blue squares or rectangles show the different transformations, if you will, and how those forms of nitrogen change. And the red rectangles or crosses, whatever they're supposed to be, are showing different routes of nitrogen loss from this environment. Okay, so important points that I want to show here. Number one, there are only two forms of nitrogen here that are immediately available to the plant, and that's ammonium and nitrate. Okay, you will see the organic form, and you're going to see the same thing when we talk about phosphorus next. Okay. The organic form of the nutrients are extremely important. Those are long-term storage, right? They're going to hang out in that soil for little longer than this plant available form. But the plant cannot directly take up any organic form of a nutrient. It has to be transformed. It has to be mineralized. Basically, it has to be eaten by something, soil, fauna, bacteria, and it has to be pooped out into the plant available form. So organic forms of nutrients are really good long-term storage, but they are not immediately available. That's generally why farmers on a larger scale are using some kind of a combination, for the most part, of the organic form of nutrients for long-term storage, but also a commercial or an inorganic form of nutrient that's immediately available to the plant and applied when the plant needs to take it up. Okay? So another important point to notice is these legumes. I mentioned some of these leguminous cover crops. These plants have the ability to harvest nitrogen that exists in the gaseous form, take it in, and provide it to the soil in the organic form. So things like soybeans, things like vetch, clovers, these are really good crops to incorporate into our rotations, be it farms or be it yard, gardens, because they have the ability to harness that atmospheric nitrogen and bring it into the soil, okay? All right, so cation exchange capacity, negative charge in your soil that is attracted to positive charges, okay? Our soil will attract that positively charged ammonium, not as tightly though, as it will hold on to other positively charged cations, all right? And our negatively charged nitrogen, that nitrate form, it's the same charge as the soil, so it's generally lost very, very rapidly, okay? If there's any water movement in our profile, that nitrate nitrogen, she gone, all right? So there are a lot of products out there. There is a lot of processes trying to keep our nitrogen in this ammonium, in this positively charged form, to minimize these different loss pathways from that negatively charged or same charged nitrogen that's going to be repelled from our soil surface anyway. All right. I would say that nitrogen and studying nitrogen and doing research on nitrogen is really hard because nitrogen never stays where you put it. I did all of my PhD work on phosphorus, which I'm going to talk about next. And phosphorus stays exactly where you put it. So I love doing research on phosphorus because you can always find it later. Nitrogen, if there's any water movement in your soil, it's gone. And it's very difficult for us to do research on, and it is also very difficult for our farmers to manage. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the phosphorus cycle. I promise the next image is a little simpler than the nitrogen cycle that we just saw. Okay, nitrogen and phosphorus arguably the second most important nutrient, very important for just overall resource utilization in your crop. So phosphorus, you think of ATP as our energy molecule. It's our currency, if you will, our living currency. So without phosphorus, our plant does not have the energy available to carry out all of the different chemical reactions it needs to survive. All right. You'll notice a lot more green circles. Phosphorus exists in a lot of different forms in the soil. Less, but not less important loss pathways, so those red rectangles. And one thing you should notice is that there is not a gaseous form of phosphorus like there was nitrogen, okay? One quick tangent I'll make talking about phosphorus, anyone who's familiar or has had any, experience talking about nutrient management, Chesapeake Bay issues, we often lump together nitrogen and phosphorus, right? We talk about Chesapeake Bay and we say NNP, nitrogen and phosphorus. And I spend a lot of time, especially with my farmers too, is really trying to separate them apart. Yes, they are both nutrients that are negative if they get into aquatic systems, but our practices that we implement to manage them are different. Nitrogen and phosphorus behave very different in the soil. So again, it's really important for individual farmers on individual fields to figure out what is that short stave. So is there issue with nitrogen or phosphorus? And then how do you address that short stave? And it's generally not one size fits all. So management practices that we put in place to manage nitrogen, for example, may not also manage phosphorus. So it's just important we think about nitrogen and phosphorus together, but we do really have to think about management of them separately. And I still feel like I beat this into my farmers, and they've been hearing me talk about this for a decade now. So back to phosphorus, you'll notice that there's one circle here. There's one, plant available form of phosphorus. We have the organic phosphorus source that, again, needs to be transformed or mineralized to become plant available, just the same as our nitrogen. But you'll notice that we have some other forms of phosphorus here that exist in the soil. And when we talk about phosphorus, when we talk about, how phosphorus is available to our plants, the double-sided arrow here is really a good representation. We're doing some research looking at, long-term drawdown. So soils where we have increased the phosphorus concentration and now we're just slowly drawing it down over time. we're looking at this relationship. So how do these arrows kind of go back and forth? We hypothesize that some of these other sources of phosphorus in the soil are actually replenishing and refilling this plant available, this soil solution phosphorus. But we're slowly getting there. We're slowly chasing that and trying to, really show that hypothesis with research over time. And really the difference here when we talk about, mineral surfaces and secondary compounds is like the difference between a handshake and like an arm grab, right? And so there's a different strength with which that phosphorus is bound up or tied up or adsorbed to the soil when we're talking about a surface versus a secondary compound. And I finally found a really good image, and this may be a little too deep in soil chemistry, so bear with me for a moment. But I finally found this image and I just love sharing it with people. So, when we're talking about this idea of, solution phosphorus, plant available phosphorus. Phosphorus doesn't exist on its own. It's always surrounded by 4 oxygens and it has a -2 charge. And, this solution phosphorus here is generally available to the plant. It's kind of attracted to the soil surface here, but it's kind of hanging out there, right? Then we have these outer sphere complexes where we start seeing some of this attraction here to the soil surface. But what I really want to beat home and what I want to show you guys is that when we're talking about these secondary compounds, the oxygens that make up the phosphate molecule actually become part of the soil surface itself. So these oxygens are being shared with the physical surface of the soil and that phosphorus molecule. That's why you'll notice, I know the text is a little difficult to read here, but we're to transform those secondary compounds to plant available phosphorus. This word is dissolution, like thinking dissolve, like dissolving with an acid, right? So to actually remove this phosphorus, you have to physically dissolve it from the soil surface. That's just a representation of the strength with which this phosphorus is bound up or tied up in the soil, that it's actually becoming part of the soil surface itself. So it's very different than nitrogen, which is basically I'm here. If the plant doesn't take me up, I'm washing through the profile. Bye, I'm gone, right? So thinking about nitrogen and phosphorus as behaving very differently in the environment. Phosphorus is extremely it does not move very far in the soil. So any free phosphorus is going to be very quickly bound up within the soil profile. So when we talk about getting your phosphorus to your plants, your plant root needs to physically bump into that phosphorus. It's needs to touch it in the soil and rip it off the soil surface, all right? Phosphorus is not going to move very far at all in your soil. Soil pH, we are getting into pH. I promise I saw multiple questions here about it. Soil pH is extremely important in controlling the availability of phosphorus. So it's in the soil, but once our pH gets outside of that optimum range, that phosphorus is no longer available to the plant. So visually, what does that look like? All right, if we're looking at phosphorus availability over here on the y-axis, we see that phosphorus is very available in kind of a narrow range of pH here. When our pH gets too low, too acidic, the phosphorus is tied up by iron and aluminum. And if our pH gets too high, that phosphorus is going to be tied up by calciums. All right, so phosphorus is very sensitive to pH. What is pH? Feel like maybe now is the right time to introduce what is pH. All right, it is the combination of H+ ions and hydroxyl OH- ions. When you bring them together, they form water. Okay, pH is simply a measure of the quantity of H+. All right. Visually, what does that look like on a scale? All right. 7 is generally neutral. Basically, an even number of those hydrogen ions and those hydroxyls. All right. When our pH values numerically become lower, less than 7, that's more acidic, right? We all know what that means. Vinegar, lemon juice, battery acid, great example. I don't know how acidic battery acid is, pretty acidic apparently, right? Vinegar, lemon juice, those are kind of common examples, right? When our pH goes below 7, we've got more hydrogen, more pluses than minuses, in very simple terms. Conversely, when we go above 7, then we're getting into basic, okay? Antacid tablets, milk, bleach. That's where we have more negative charges, okay? And this is, again, sorry, we're going there. We're getting into some chemistry, but it is what it is, all right? My favorite image of all time. All right, this right here, if you are a visual learner like me, burn this into your brain, okay? pH and nutrient availability, all right? This image is showing on the top and the bottom a soil pH scale, and I've put a box around generally what is our optimum soil pH range. And as you look at these bars that represent these individual nutrients, the thickness of the bar, so the thicker the bar, the more available, plant available that nutrient is. And you can see how the thickness of those bars changes as you get in and out of kind of the box that I drew there. So we refer to soil pH as the master variable. So someone calls me and says they're having an issue with their phosphorus, and I'm like, I don't care. What's the pH of your soil? All right, let's start there. Okay. And someone will call me and say, oh, but I need to add more of this. No. Let's consult your soil test. What's the pH of your soil? All right. Adding more nutrients to your soil is not combating the issue of the fact that the nutrients that are there are unavailable because your soil is outside of that optimum range. Okay. We want our soil to generally stay in this range. When we get below, when we get too acidic, our micronutrients are becoming unavailable, okay? We are also getting into the situation where things like iron and aluminum are toxic. We don't need that much iron and aluminum. We don't want the availability of that to be too great, okay? When we get above our optimum range, so too basic, we also can start tying up some of those micronutrients as well. So it's important that we're keeping our soils in this kind of optimum range. This is the money shot here, okay? All right, where does soil acidity come from? So I put these slides in here, and I want to set the stage for a moment of young Nicole in one of her first soils class, sitting here. Remember, I was an animal science person background. I didn't, I came to soils, I came to agronomy, I was brand new. I'm sitting in this soils class, and I really didn't want to raise my hand and ask this question because I thought, this is one of those stupid questions. They say there's no stupid questions, but there are stupid questions, okay? And I'm sitting here going, this is a stupid question. But why are we constantly talking about raising our pH? We're talking about liming. We're talking about increasing our soil pH. My question in my head, why are we never worried about lowering our soil pH? So if you had this question in your head about a moment ago, please don't feel stupid. It is a very legitimate question that I think people sometimes gloss over it very quickly and think that it's common knowledge, and it's not. And I want to spend some time talking about it because I think it's important that we all understand how systems work. So there is a lot of focus in agronomy and fertility classes of raising our pH. And that is because there are a lot of factors that are there are a lot of things happening in our soils. We are generally always acidifying our soils, okay? So looking here on this list, I used to have them pop up one by one, but we're just going to kind of show them all at one time, okay? generally just like existing, soils existing are generally always becoming more acidic. When we look at natural undisturbed soils like a forest soil, for example, where I showed you that beautiful image of that white illuviated E horizon, okay? When you take a soil sample in an undisturbed, unmanaged forest, those pHs are like 4. Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening in those soils except trees are growing, they're dropping their leaves, they're adding fertilizer to the soil, but the process of just existing as a soil, we are always moving in the acid direction. That's why we're not usually worried about acidifying our soils, except in special conditions for some of these specialty crops, right? But generally, our soils are always moving in the acidic direction because of things like acid rain, crop removal. Just growing crops, you are generally creating more acidity in your soil. Using fertilizers, I'm going to show you an equation. Buckle up, we're getting there. You know, we are just generally, organic matter decomposition creates acid, creates hydrogen ions. All right. So in case you were unaware, I answered the question for everybody that our soils are always moving in the acidic direction. So we are generally always fighting that by trying to raise the soil pH. So I'm going to show you this equation all at once. Don't choke on it. Don't worry about it. Don't memorize it. I'm going to show you the highlights here. Okay. The most important thing that I want you to see is that when you use a fertilizer like urea, okay, the process of breaking down this urea to a nitrogen form, ammonium and nitrate, that are available to the plant, all I want you to pay attention to are the red, okay? For every hydroxyl, for every 1 negative charge, you are creating 4 positive charges. That's the most important part of this whole equation, okay? The red highlights here. So by using fertilizer, by applying nitrogen to your crop, this is how you are generating that acidity. You are lowering that soil pH just naturally by this chemical equation happening. All right. That's just how the cookie crumbles. All right. So we use things like lime or liming agents to fight, to push our pH in the other direction. And again, I don't want you to memorize this. I don't want you to memorize this. The point that I want you to see here is that by adding some type of a liming agent, you are generating hydroxyls, negative charges, that are quickly attaching to the hydrogens and forming water. Okay? When I was a master's student and I went through my defense, I went on this whole rant about calcium and how calcium was so important in affecting the pH. And I nearly cried during my defense when I got asked a question about what about it doesn't have anything to do with the calcium. It has to do with the hydrogen. And I was like, I've learned nothing in this 2 years. So I will never, ever get this wrong again, because something that makes you cry or almost cry once, you will never get wrong again. So the lime that you use does not matter. It has nothing to do with the calcium, has nothing to do with the magnesium. What we care about is generating this negative charge to tie up, to slurp up the positive charge in that soil. Okay. Now, if you have a bit of a magnesium deficiency, if your soils are a little bit low in magnesium, when you get your soil test report, there may be a recommendation to use magnesium, dolomitic limestone, to add some of that magnesium. But it has nothing to do with that in terms of the neutralizing of the hydrogen. All right, I'm going to keep going. Soil testing. That's what I wanted to get through. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about soil testing because I think this is really important and I want to make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking about soil testing. What is soil testing? All right. Why do we soil test? We soil test for a variety of reasons. Probably one, to get some guidance on how much lime and how much fertilizer to use in your growing area, be that a farm field or a garden, all right? A soil test will give you a snapshot of your pH, the nutrient availability, and the nutrient quantity in your soil. Maybe you want a soil test because you see a deficiency or a toxicity somewhere and you want to double check it. Generally, soil testing helps folks limit pollution, save money, and really optimize your plant health, okay? Operationally defining soil testing. This is taking a subsample of soil from your growing area, again, a 100-acre field or your backyard garden, and it provides you a snapshot of what's happening at that moment in your soil, all right? A soil test uses a strongly acidic solution to extract nutrients from the soil. And that solution is meant to mimic the near root conditions in your plant, in your soil. Plants are smart. Their roots have the ability to exude acids, to dissolve that phosphorus, to locally change the pH, and make those nutrients available for plant uptake. So when you're sending your soil to a lab, that solution, that extractant solution, is meant to mimic the root conditions, and it gives you an idea of what nutrients are available to that plant. When I talk about soil testing, I'm referring to a soil test that is performed at either a commercial lab or a university soil testing lab, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that in a minute. So, back to that soil sample extraction. All right. Again, we're not getting a picture of all of the phosphorus, all of the potassium, all of the magnesium, all of the calcium in your soil. A soil extraction is simply giving you this amount of phosphorus is available to your plant. And this is really important. You may say, like, Nicole, that's semantics, but it's not. It's very important to understand the capacity and the limitations of what our soil tests, our soil testing labs are doing. They're trying to give you recommendations and guidance on how to make your plant, your crop grow by giving you a snapshot of what nutrients are available to your plant. All right. And a soil sample, soil test that is performed at a commercial lab considers your texture and your cation exchange capacity of that soil. All right, I don't want to spend too much time going through how to take a soil sample. I'll show you this image of me taking a soil sample. Generally, you want to use a soil probe. I imagine your extension office has one available that you can borrow. I like to say you want to walk through your field, your garden area in the shape of an M for Maryland. Collect a whole bunch of soils and always air dry. I think I have multiple slides that say the same thing. Provide all the requested information to the lab. We're going to come back to that. What depth should you soil or should you sample? You want to represent the conditions with which your plant roots are going to experience. So agricultural soils, generally we go tillage depth 6 to 8 inches. Lawns, you think about a grass root, it's very shallow. You want to sample the area that the plants that you are growing are going to exist in, okay? How many samples should I take? Classic extension answer, it depends. Generally, 10 samples. I don't know, in a 100-acre field, I take more than 10 samples. In a garden, you know, I'm sure you can get away with 10 to 12 samples, all right? The most important thing, mix, 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 and then keep mixing, all right? You may send in, let's say, a Ziploc bag or less quantity for your sample. When your sample gets to the lab, they're taking a 10-gram scoop, one little scoop. So you want to make sure that that 10-gram scoop that they are taking is representing your whole area. So that's why it's super important to mix, 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 mix. When should you soil sample? It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I would say be consistent. I'm going to tell you that if you soil sample in the spring and you send it to a commercial lab, your sample is going to have to wait until all of the ag soils get analyzed because the farmers are probably going to need their soils more quickly. So sample in the fall. It really doesn't matter. But you definitely don't want to sample right after you apply lime or you apply fertilizer. You're generally going to do your soil sampling to get guidance on how to apply the lime and fertilizer. All right. Every 2 to 4 years, things don't change that much or that quickly in your soils. So every 2 to 4 years is probably adequate. Do not sample wet soil. If you have to wear boots and a raincoat to go out into your soil, into your field, into your area to take your soil samples, it's too wet to sample. Let's put it that way, okay? I can't exactly describe it to you. You don't want it to be too wet. You don't want to be too dry, okay? If you think that there is a problem, spend double the cost of the soil test and sample your affected area and sample a normal area in your growing area. Keep them separate and send them to the lab separately. This is like going to the doctor and they say, let's get a baseline x-ray blood work so that if there's a problem later, we have something to compare it to. Okay. And if it's really bad, maybe you'll take a plant tissue test and you could also send that to the lab to get further information. Okay. The most important thing you can do is fill out all of the information on the form as much as possible. There's going to be a line that says crop, or maybe it's an online menu and it's a drop-down menu and it says, what's your crop? And you're going to say, well, I'm not growing a crop. I'm not growing corn or soybeans. Find the crop or the plant that is closest to what you are growing, because that is going to give you your recommendations. Okay, the recommendations from the lab are solely based on the information that you put on the form. So if you don't check any crop, then you're not going to get any recommendations because they don't know what to tell you because they don't know what you're growing. If you are establishing a new garden and you want to split your garden into quadrants and you say, I'm going to grow tomatoes over here and I'm going to grow flowers over here and I'm going to grow berries over whatever, send 4 separate soil samples and check the crop, the plant that you plan to grow. And you will get 4 different recommendations because you will get a tailored recommendation based on your soil and the crop that you intend on growing there. Okay? All right, I get this question all the time. Nicole, why should I waste my money sending my sample to a lab, which by the way, it's like $8 to $10 per sample. It's really not breaking the bank. When I can just go to the garden center and I can buy one of these little test kits. All right. So I've pretty much already given you guys part of the answer here, right? So like number 1, I told you that the commercial testing labs are using a really, really strongly acidic, it's got hydrofluoric acid in it. I've mixed up this solution before and I was like trying not to burn my face off because it is super acidic. Okay. That is clearly not going to be available in your garden test, okay? Moreover, there's been studies out the wazoo that show these in-home tests are unreliable, all right? Even beyond that, let me just humor you for a second and say, yes, your rapid test that you got from the garden center is accurately telling you, what level the phosphorus is in your soil. Okay, even if the results from these test kits were spot on, how do you interpret the results? How do you know how much fertilizer you should apply when the phosphorus extractant comes back and tells you there are 75 parts per million of phosphorus in your soil? Do you know? I'm going to be honest with you, I don't. I use soil test recommendations from the lab just as much as anybody else. I don't always know how to interpret those results. I don't know what a high calcium value is. I don't have the brain capacity to memorize that, okay? So what you are paying for when you are sending a soil test to the lab, you are paying for a human to give you the recommendations, to tell you exactly how you should apply those nutrients, all right? There are alternative soil tests. I don't know. I've looked into these. I'm not saying they're bad. I just think that they have different purposes, okay? I am performing a soil test because I want to know how to fertilize my crop, be it my garden, be it my corn, okay? I don't know what 45 means. I've researched phosphorus for like a decade. I don't know how 45 parts per million is considered red, is considered high. I don't know what extractant they're using. I've Googled this up the wazoo. If I can't figure it out as a researcher, I don't know how like the general public is able to figure it out. So I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying that this doesn't speak to me in the same language that I'm used to. And there's not enough background information here on a report like this for me to make interpretations based on these results. Okay, I'm used to seeing a soil test report that looks something like this. Generally from any lab, be it a university lab, be it a commercial lab, I have no preference, I have no favorites. University of Maryland no longer has a soil test lab. Penn State has a good lab. Delaware has a good lab. Pick one that's in the Mid-Atlantic region. You're going to see a result that looks like this. It has your information. It's going to have the crop that you picked, that you said you wanted to grow, and there should be some type of visual representation of the results here. And then here's the money. Here is what you're paying for, is those recommendations. All right. There's no accurate measurement of soil nitrogen. They cannot give you a recommendation of how much nitrogen to apply unless you tell them what crop, what plant you were growing, okay? I want to go through and I want to dissect one of these. We have a few more minutes and I want to be respectful. I want to end on time for everyone, but I kind of wanted to pick apart a couple of these soil test results. So what you should see is always some type of a visual representation of the results. So typically you'll have the major macronutrients here, pH, or master variable, pK, maybe magnesium and calcium. And then they'll give you the number because you know what that means, maybe sometimes, okay? And then there will be some type of a visual chart that tells you where that number falls kind of on this scale, okay? Again, I'm very familiar with phosphorus. I know what 96 for phosphorus means. I know that that's in the optimum range. These other ones, couldn't tell you. I've not done enough research with them. So even me as a researcher, I need this like handy dandy visual to give me a quick snapshot of where my soil is at. All right. Organic matter, you've got some of your other micros. Here's where you put your crop, and then here's where you get in numbers and in words recommendations for how to apply those nutrients. These are personalized recommendations based on your results of your soil. This is what you are paying for. Okay, here's another example from a different lab, AgriLab, that's a commercially available lab. You'll see it's very similar. It looks different, but it's similar. There's the results and there's a visual, some type of a scale, so you understand kind of where your results fall. So this soil has a very low pH and an extremely low phosphorus. I am very impressed to see phosphorus that low, all right? And then down here, whoever submitted this soil put garden, and this is the recommendation that AgriLab provides. Here's another example of a University of Delaware result. This was someone sent this in. Here are the results. You can see, wow, off the charts, excessive for most of these nutrients. And you can see written out in words the recommendations here. Here's another example of a results printout from AgriLab, where you see a lot of these values are in the either sufficient or high category. All right. Here is one more. Oh, I think that was the same one, again, from University of Delaware. I have 2 minutes. I want to actually see, let me peek in the questions here before we get too far along, because I want to make sure I'm not like completely ignoring the questions. Whoa, this was very long. Okay. I think I answered some of these as I went through. Homeowners get their soil samples evaluated. Check. I got that. Best way to manage soil pH. Hopefully I kind of answered your question as I went through. University of Delaware, native population. Okay, I'm gonna have to come back to that one because that one was long. Fertilizer law. Yeah, that's a whole 2-hour lecture on itself. What if you have some areas of your yard that have better soil conditions than others? Should you send it all in one sample or separate? Great question. I would say separate. If you know that there are differences and you are prepared to manage those areas differently, then I would send them as separate samples. There's lumpers and splitters, and I'm a splitter. I'm all about as much precision as we can. So if you're like, hey, I know that area is not great, or you're in the early stages of establishing a garden, soil sample a couple different areas and maybe get a feel for those conditions before you commit to an area. At-home tests aren't very helpful. Yes. Can you check pH more readily, or you need to send that out to a lab for that as well? So checking pH itself, just pH, and I didn't have time to get into this, and maybe Andrew's going to get into this. I think he is when he does plant nutrition. The value of this soil test result here is not necessarily just the soil pH. That actually, you mix water and soil together and you get a pH meter. There's really nothing special about measuring your soil's pH. But what is important and what is taken into account when you get your recommendations from the lab is this buffer pH, okay? And it's the combination of what your soil pH is and your buffer pH that will give you the recommendation for how you should apply your lime, okay? Buffer pH is just basically how resistant your soil is to change. So pH is like, how bad are you? How far outside of that optimum are you? And then buffer pH is like, how much work are you going to have to put into it to get your soil back into that optimum range? Because a soil could potentially be very resistant to change. And that is taken into account, that is measured in the buffer pH. So yeah, you could like buy a pH meter and mix soil and water together and test it on your own, but that reading alone is not going to give you the full picture of how resistant your soil is to change. You do need that buffer pH reading. So great. And it has to do with texture, and it has to do with your CEC. Yes, 100%. Someone asked a question earlier, I did want to come back to it, about their soil test results did not have a texture reading. If you are curious, it may not be part of a standard package, probably at any of the testing labs, but for an additional fee, you can get your soil texture, but you probably could just go onto Web Soil Survey and get it for free. But it's just because it's really a pain in the butt to measure texture. I've done it on like 1,000 samples. It's really a pain, and the soil testing labs don't want to do it if they don't have to. But like for an additional fee, they will measure your texture for you. It's just not part of like a routine standard package. So check out their website and check kind of like their buffet options. You may be able to add on that texture. So it may not be their standard, but it can be added on. I did want to answer that because someone asked that a little bit earlier. Steve, I don't want to go too far over time here. I'm sorry that I went long. I think I got most of the questions in the chat.
Okay. Well, I know we got Andrew coming up here. He'll probably get him motivated, your talk here, and they'll have lots more questions for Andrew. I'm sure he'll love that. He'll love it. He's great. So I think we'll have some more opportunity to talk about this later on when Andrew gets here.
Absolutely.
So, and thanks, Nicole, for coming and spending time with us this evening.
Thank you all so much. Oh, I realized I didn't. Here, let me go to my final slide with my email address. And like I said, I'll send this all to you guys, but I know what happens is that, you walk out of here and you're like, but I had one question for her. So let me see if I can just put my, I'll put my email address up here for you guys. So email is the best way to contact me. I don't check the voicemail on that phone. And like I said, I will get Steve a copy of these slides Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I love talking about soils, and I hope that Andrew can follow up on some of the topics that I've introduced, and you guys can dive a little deeper into some of these topics. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Hey, so guys, well, just this Wednesday, we've got two speakers. We've got Susan Eisenrand talking about composting, kind of related here, and Marie's going to talk about gardening for wildlife. So we got two speakers this coming Wednesday. Have a few minutes before class. I sent an email out with the link to the Google site. So, I can catch up with you on Wednesday about that and see who can open it. Maybe you can't, whatever. And I'll try to work it out so that everyone can get to copies of these past presentations. And I'm going to check with Willie and Renew. I thought they were going to post the presentations on our website, but maybe I misunderstood. And I'm going to get a copy from Willie and Renew, and maybe I'll put it at the same place too. So I got to check with my volunteers here, make sure I got this straight what we're thinking. So hopefully by Wednesday I'll have more answers for you. So everybody, have a good night, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.